皆さんこんにちは。東洋大学の田淵と申します。今年で15回を迎える国際 PPP フォーラムはこのコロナ禍の中でオンラインでの開催となります。日本世界の PPP 経済開発の専門家の方々からビデオメッセージをいただき、それらを編集して YouTube で発信するフォーラムとしました。このインタビューセッションは世界の PPP の専門家の方々にインタビューし、世界がどのようにコロナパンデミックと戦おうとしているか、PPP の活用をどうしようとしているのか、災害、パンデミックに対してどう対応しようとしているのかについてインタビューしたいと思います。今日ご参加いただきますパネリストは、アメリカからはニューオーリンズにあります世界レジリエンスセンターのセンター長、デイビッド・ドッド氏、またポルトガルからは国連 PPP 推進のビジネスアドバイザリーボードの副座長のペドロ・ネイブスさんにお願いしております。私はモデレーターの東洋大学の田淵です。PPP 大学院また国際学部グローバルイノベーション学科で教授をさせていただいております。また国連 PPP 作業部会では議長を務めさせていただいております。インタビュー自体は英語で行わせていただき、テロップで日本語を書き加えさせていただきます。今日はよろしくお願いいたします。Thank you for taking your time to join us for the 15th PPP International Forum for Toyo University PPP Graduate School. So we're going to go start right into the interview itself. All right. First, Japanese audience will be interested hearing effect of COVID-19 at your own country. Starting, Pedro, can you tell me what's happening in Portugal with coronavirus?
Thank you, Sam, and hello, David. I'm very honored to be with you. And going to the question now, Portugal started in March. March 17th was the first day that the government announced, and we started in having isolation. We went up to 1,200 infected people per day, and we went up to 20 people dying per day. Then we decreased, and during the summer it was quite calm. Today we have the second wave coming in. We now have 1,000 people getting infected per day. Obviously, we also have a lot more testing going on, and we have now between 5 and 10 people dying per day, and we have 600 people in hospitals and in intensive care we have 200. This is very important for us because what we see today is basically coming back to confinement and isolation, and I would say that again we learned from the first wave, but we still have a lot to learn on the second wave, because I would say that the challenge today, it really is to align the health challenge with the economic challenge, and to make sure that the decrease in economic activity doesn't go down as it did on the first wave, but at the same time that we preserve the health environment so that we protect people as much as possible.
Are you satisfied with the remedies or government policies toward corona in Portugal?
I would say that the very important thing that it was the government adopted a full transparency towards data, and every day at 1 p.m. The Ministry of Health comes to public television to inform us on the number of people that got infected, that went to hospital, and that died as well. And I think this was very important. Also, the fact that the testing increased a great deal was also makes people feel safe. Now, obviously, after the first wave and people feeling safe, it was a little bit dramatic to tell people now we have the second wave and we have to go back without shutting everything down, but still preserving. As we were talking before between ourselves, the Portuguese and I would say Europeans in general, we were not used to wearing masks. Now everybody is it's natural. I would say people even feel disturbed if someone next to us is not wearing a mask, and so I would say that obviously it's not new, and we have to know how to practice resilience because we don't really know how long is it going to take. The President of the Republic yesterday informed everybody that Christmas will probably be different, and so we are taking things as with as much calm as possible, especially because we have to you have to realize that our big neighbor, Spain, is today the country with more infected people in Europe, and so we have to again keep having all the relationships with Spain, but making sure that we preserve ourselves. So I would say it's challenging times for all of us, for our families. I think the biggest challenge today, Sam, and it's considered a public health challenge, is towards the elderly people, because the elderly people they have to be protected, but on the other hand, they have not been able to get out of their homes as much as they used to, and so today it's very important to and I would say all civil societies is watching this. So in terms of solidarity, it's very interesting because we have a lot of new voluntary work to assist elderly people. But I would say that's the biggest challenge we have today. It really is to to make people that have to stay home as comfortable and as close to other human lives as possible.
Thank you. How about you, David? How about the United States?
Well, our situation is not good, and it hasn't been good for quite a while. Now, taking into account that I'm not sure the population of Portugal, and by the way, it's an honor to be with you, Pedro, as well. I'm not certain of the population of Portugal, but certainly the U.S. has a much larger population, 328 million people. But we have had, this is really important, 328 million people, 7.8 million cases. So, of over 2.5% of the population has had COVID. And we have lost 215,000 Americans. That number just really doesn't sink in as it probably should. It's so abstract to us. More casualties than all the conflict that the U.S. has been involved with since World War II together. So it's really a dire situation, Sam, and our GDP dropped as much as 9%. We had as many as 50 million Americans unemployed, and we still have a significant number of people that are without work, who are now, we've passed 3 major stimulus packages in the beginning of the outbreak, which kept a lot of people and a lot of small businesses afloat. But now, in the absence of another stimulus package, we're seeing a large number of small businesses that have been hanging on. And I use the term in social media, we're seeing the mass extinction of small businesses in the United States. And that is something that's going to be with us for a very long time. So all of the efforts of my center, and as you know, Sam, my center deals with public-private partnerships for disaster resilience and recovery. And all of our efforts are now focused on trying to help the economy around the world adapt to COVID-19. And we did a research study and found that, according to estimates from reputable sources, the cost of just the built environment adaptation, in other words, adapting schools, hospitals, public transportation and distribution and logistics, all of that, the cost of that's about $10 trillion worldwide. And governments don't have the funds because of the economic impact of this and the massive amount they've had to spend around the world to keep their economies afloat. They don't have the money for these types of changes that are going to need to be made. So the task is enormous for us, for all of us. And the center that you founded, Sam, is going to have to really get into high gear, because the public sector is going to have to learn how to do public-private partnerships in many different ways. I know, Sam, you coined the term public-public partnerships, and I think that's going to be absolutely necessary. National governments are going to need to step in and help state and local governments or provincial governments, but also private-private partnerships between commercial and non-governmental or charitable organizations are also going to have to be approached. So it's going to take new thinking on the part of those of us involved in public-private partnerships as to what that means and how it can be utilized, because the need is overwhelming.
That is the focus of this interview today. But before we get into that, has American people in general been satisfied with present administration by the White House, as well as the state of Louisiana, for example, for their handling of this pandemic?
I'll answer that as 2 distinct issues. Nationally, according to polls, 75% of people are dissatisfied with the administration's handling of COVID-19. Now, take into account that our current president has had and maintained a base of 40% of the population that supports him. So even some of his supporters are dissatisfied. And then there are a variety of reasons for that. I'm certain that that many of the listeners to this see news from the U.S. We certainly see news from Japan and how relatively well Japan has handled this. But it's really disheartening to know that it's not been handled well. Now, from the state's perspective, I live in the state of Louisiana, one of the 50 states. Our population is about 4.5 million, so we're not a terribly populous state, but we're home to a very famous city, which is New Orleans. A little anecdote, Sam, about 30 years ago when I first got into economic development, Louisiana was really going after Japanese investment. foreign direct investment. And we assembled a group of 22 Japanese executives. We asked them how many had heard of Louisiana, and 3 raised their hands. Then we asked how many had heard of New Orleans, and all 22 raised their hands. In Louisiana, we just say New Orleans. And New Orleans is a very unique place. It's a very socially active city, home to the Mardi Gras Festival, which many people have heard of. It's billed as a festival, a Christian-based festival, but it's anything but tame. Basically 6 weeks of nonstop parties, and it draws people from around the world. And the feeling was that Mardi Gras, which generally happens in late February or early March, this year it happened in late February, was probably what they call a super spreader event, because 3 million people packed into a relatively small city as far as size, and we had a huge outbreak in mid-March, right as the global lockdown started. We've since brought that under control. We've had a couple of, as Pedro said, you say control, but it's not a constant. Our numbers went down, and then they went back up as we tried to loosen some of the restrictions on activities such as dining out. New Orleans food is famous around the world. People come from all over, or did come to partake of the food, and that's really slowed completely down. So it's been tough. It's been really, really tough.
I spent 1 minute in this. I spent over 30 years in Florida.
Yes.
Bad administration leadership in the governor's office. I had some people I know died. And one time in Florida, 20,000 people a day infected.
Yes.
Every 8 minutes, we lost a person in Florida. So Florida, with all the age of populations, really still suffering. And I cannot, we're not talking about COVID today, but for Japan, 125 million people, 89,000 people infected, lost more than 1,500 people. So every day, 2-3 people die, but around a second wave now slowing down, 500 to 600 people are infected in Japan. So compared to the United States and European countries, Japan is doing better. I believe due to the custom of wearing masks and not touching each other, bowing and so on, may have been the reason that Taiwan, Korea, Japan to have far less numbers. I am not happy with what Japanese government's doing, but so far, compared to Europe and the United States, Japan is better off.